gas from other countries of the Gulf, other than Iran, will not be targeted. That is
So
one
this
point.
is the point, that we're going from conciliatory now to a maximalist position, and we're talking about a blockade that affects all of us. Aina Tangent, this blockade, the Hormuz blockade, is it really about Iran, or is Washington now deliberately using this blockade to cut China off from Iranian oil and constrain Beijing's strategic room to maneuver in this kind of scenario that we have before us?
A little bit too much analysis going on. Donald Trump is pushed into a corner. His natural instincts are to double down. The idea that he wanted the Straits of Hormuz open, so he's going to blockade them, does that even make sense? And I was very surprised my colleague didn't outright condemn. This was a war of choice. She laid the background for the fact that progress was being made, and the U.S. went ahead with it. And now we're in this position. Now the U.S. is violating the UN Charter, and no mention of that. I mean, I think we have to be very, very clear. The U.S. is now officially a rogue nation, and it is doing, because it's not just seized, searched, prevented from selling their product. Well, you can't get out unless you pay Iran, and if you pay Iran, the U.S. is going to intercept you. So basically, he's saying he's cutting off the world from 20% of its energy. That includes Japan, South Korea, India. So this idea that it's all about China, it's fine, definitely. Donald Trump is expected, anytime he does an official visit, to go there and say, hey, you know, do something, throw something into the fire, try to gain some leverage. But the fact is, his madman diplomacy doesn't work anymore. It's too predictable. He does it all the time. So I assume China will take it in stride, see it for what it is. You know, the kind of
this blockade is. Einar, would you suggest that this blockade has been a predictable part of how Trump has kind of maneuvered through this entire conflict with Iran?
Yes, in response to, you know, with Iran basically making him look weak by saying, no, we're not giving in to your demands, and sticking to their own. He feels he doesn't have a choice. He has to double down. He has to be the bully he wants people to believe him. He is. So what else can he do except say, oh, well, if I don't give, you don't give me what I want, I'm going to cut off the rest of the world, which is not going to work out for him politically, because Americans are already facing above $4 a gallon gasoline. They're not happy. And many of the people who voted for him are in the most vulnerable and fragile economic position. They're the ones who are really going to suffer. They could be looking at losing their homes, jobs, etc. So he's not acting in a rational way. He's acting in a way that keeps the Epstein files off the front page and allows him to pretend that he's in control of a situation he lost control of the day he started bombing Iran.
Talking about this blockade in particular, Commodore Anil Jaisingh, here you have Einar talking about the bullying tactics of Trump, like he calls it, but operationally, how enforceable is this blockade? Intercept, searches, mine clearing, without triggering a wider naval confrontation, how possible is it to carry through?
As has been brought out by the other panelists, a blockade is not a solution. It's a knee-jerk reaction to a situation which is getting out of control. And therefore, while Iran demanding a toll on ships passing through the Strait was imposed when war is declared, even when the Falklands War took place in 1982, there was no formal declaration of war. And therefore, they imposed something called exclusion zones, maritime exclusion zones and total exclusion zones. They did not call it a blockade. The second issue with the blockade is it's very easy to declare a blockade. It's not so easy to enforce it. And if you're not able to enforce a blockade effectively and ships are still able to go through, it destroys the credibility of your navy, which has been tasked to enforce a blockade.
So is that likely to happen, Commodore? Is that likely to happen?
Ships may may switch off the AIS and may pass through. How many ships at a time can the US, what kind of force will the US bring to bear to enforce the blockade? Are they going to position a full carrier battle group?
And Commodore, what about Iran? If Iran retaliates by threatening the Bab el-Mandeb, does that automatically internationalize the conflict across multiple choke points then?
That was the second point I was coming to. So if they blockade the Hormuz and Iran retaliates by getting the Houthis to blockade the Bab el-Mandeb, it compounds the problem. Will the Americans then go and blockade something else? I mean, is there no end to this, firstly? And secondly, the implication of this blockade, in whatever form it is enforced, if it does affect the movement of ships and oil and trade to other parts of the world, you mentioned China, Ambassador mentioned India, and other countries which have stayed out of this conflict so far, it will bring them directly into the conflict, not in terms of kinetic, any kinetic actions, but otherwise.
Right.
Because they were concerned and they will. So I think President Trump's tactics are to get these countries which are going to get affected by this blockade to put pressure on Iran to open the Straits of Hormuz and then he lift the blockade.
Let me take that across to Sierra Claire, who's joining us from California. Is that the tactic over here, to pressure Iran into opening up the Strait of Hormuz? Would you agree?
Well, I don't know that we need to pressure Iran to open up the strait. It is a pressure tactic to get them to agree to have no nuclear weapons. But if I could just go back to a couple things. The first thing is that Americans are not suffering economically, besides paying slightly higher prices at the gas pump. But many Americans are actually going to win economically because there are so many tankers that are coming to the Gulf of America right now. I just looked at the map before I came on here. It's a staggering number. So our oil is going to be sold all around the world. That's helping Americans. And in terms of the U.S. naval abilities to enforce the blockade, I don't have any reservations about that. I want to remind people as well that Iran was the one who was charging $2 million a ship, or trying to, and actually some countries did end up paying that, which goes to funding Iran's terrorism program. So they were the ones that were holding the Strait hostage first, not the USA. We are finishing the job.
Einar thinks otherwise. Einar, do come in on this.
Trump talk points. I think it's better to look at this as has been framed by the last three, myself included. This is an illegal act by a desperate nation, by a man who's lost control. We need no other utterance than what he said on Easter Sunday, which is supposed to be a sacred day to Christians, and he was using profanities and talking about how he's going to destroy civilization. He's been knocked by the Pope, the single most holy man in Western civilization, although there are many in different sects within the Protestant side. And he's, instead of admitting that he needs to reflect what he has done, is doubled down and says he doesn't care for the Pope. This is a man who cannot hire people who are competent. Look at the people he's had to fire because of what they've been unable to do.
Yes.
This is a real question about whether they are setting Trump up for the 25th Amendment to remove him and put in J.D. Vance.
That's another debate altogether. But at this time, when we're talking about the implications of the blockade, Aditya Saraswat, do come in. Nearly 20% global oil flows through Hormuz. If disruption persists, are we realistically looking at $120 a barrel? Is that a realistic near-term outcome now?
At the minimum, $120 per barrel, because the Brent has already crossed $100 per barrel, close to 10% of movement in this trajectory. We have seen similar trajectory runs when the Strait of Hormuz was disrupted in the past. If the blockade is enforced, we can realistically see prices inching towards $130 and $150 per barrel. And even if there is a resolution in place, then we are likely looking at weeks, if not months, to clear out the tanker backlog, to have the flows reinstate again, to have Strait of Hormuz normalized again, and have global energy deliveries restored to its normalcy. And the bottom line here is the current prices are still discounting to a near-term resolution up until April 22nd. This could be very well seen as a posturing between the two sides, because if there is a complete blockade, it falls beyond the energy sector. It impacts agriculture, fertilizers, industry supply chains, to name the few. So,
yes.
So apparently, this has a disruption and ripple effect in all walks of life we come from.
But Einar, as he was saying, now China gets almost half its oil imports through Hormuz. 90% of Iran's oil exports flow to China. You tell us, before I go across to Einar, about the implications over there. Aditya, how exposed is Beijing right now to this blockade?
Pointing out, it imports 90% of Iranian crude, close to 50% of exports go to China. But then they have strategic petroleum reserves, which immediately gives them a buffer, a decision buffer time to act against it. And that's important from Beijing's perspective. On top of that, Beijing has been subjected to tariffs, sanctions, and now supply shocks. All of these indicators are essentially overlapping as we speak, which is historically quite unique in that sense. And even if US is pushing China to buy its own oil, first of all, in terms of absolute capacity on offer, it is 5 to 6 times lower than what Strait of Hormuz produces, and not even the same grade. So essentially, it's a denial to economic benefits, and more importantly, after Venezuela, Iran was another discounted source of crude to China. So there are multifaceted factors at play here while we see this U.S. energy diplomacy unfolding.
So as much as we are hearing right now that this blockade is illegal and Trump should not be doing this, Jayant Dasgupta, is this blockade leverage meant to force Iran back into talks, back into negotiation, back into opening up the Strait of Hormuz? Or do you think that negotiating window has already slammed shut now? Where do we stand on the negotiations, according to you?
This is one of his last desperate gestures to bring Iran back to the negotiating table. But from what has transpired in Islamabad, without any movement on the part of the U.S., and rather than trying to harvest the low-hanging fruits in terms of, let's say, unfreezing some of the frozen assets of Iran and so on, his team started with the toughest question, which was the nuclear weapons question. Now, that had been more or less, I think, sorted out diplomatically by President Obama way back in 2015. But President Trump, I am very sorry to be saying this, in 2018, he walked out of that agreement. So Iran, again, is back to square one. And Iranians have made it very clear that they are not going to compromise. Of course, if they get many other things in return for this, there could be some elbow room, some room for negotiation. But to put this across the table as the first demand and then expect Iranians to blink, I think this was asking for too much.
Is it asking for too much? Sierra Claire, what do you say to what Jayant Dasgupta is saying, that this is asking for too much? Trump is in between a rock and a very hard place right now. Even when it comes to politics at home, when it comes to the elections that are looming large in November, all of that stands against him and he needs a resolution soon. So is this the way to go as far as Americans are concerned? Is there a popular vote for the kind of stance he's taken on the Iran war?
Well, I think President Trump wants a quick resolution to this for the world and for the Iranian people. And many American people are with him. Polls continue to show that they support the operation in Iran. I do want to draw attention to the Saudi Arabian oil pipeline, which is fully operational. It has been semi-operational throughout this and is now being reported as fully operational. And, this is just accelerating the move to oil pipelines in that region because these Gulf states are so tired of Iran and their games. So, in terms of the cutting off the world from oil, I don't think that's the case. I think it's a bumpy transition, to be sure, but this was already going to be happening anyway with acceleration towards pipelines. And as far as the midterm elections and elections for Trump, he is, in the American viewpoint, he is actually becoming more popular through the fact that he didn't make a bad deal in negotiations. And so I think that when Americans see his resolve, it reinforces the message that this is a serious national security threat. This operation was in fact necessary, because if Trump had made a bad deal or just agreed with the Iranians, then it would have sent the wrong message that maybe this wasn't as much of a threat. But it is a threat.
There is no deal. The point is there is no deal. But there is no deal, and there is the talk of a blockade, which is indeed cutting off oil lines to the world, including India. Veena Sikri, where India stands caught between energy security and strategic autonomy and rising great power tension, how do you think this affects us?
Well, it does affect us, but I think we are ready to be part of the solution. And I think the most important point to see today is that how is the world reacting to President Trump's announcement of the blockade? If, for example, in the UK, Prime Minister Keir Starmer has already said that he will not be joining with the American naval blockade. So I think the question that President Trump was expecting, that once again asking the NATO allies to come in and join the blockade, that's not happening. In fact, UK and France have announced another initiative of their own, that they're once again going to try peacefully to make sure that the Straits of Hormuz remain open and that they're not in favor of any blockade. So this is a very important international reaction because I don't think that the American Navy by itself will be able to insist and enforce such a blockade. There are too many difficulties in doing that. And if the international community comes together, India was part of that first initiative, that conference that was held in UK, initiated by Prime Minister Keir Starmer on finding a peaceful solution. This is now being further reinforced by UK and France coming together and saying that they're going to have such a conference. So I think the international forces in favor of, number one, extending the ceasefire, number two, ensuring that there's no further violence, no further war in the region, these are gathering steam. And I think that if the international community...
How invested is China in ensuring that there is no more violence over there and that the Strait of Hormuz opens up so that lifelines, when it comes to oil, they are safely restored? Einar, what do you say about that? In terms of the investments that China is making to be able to resolve this, how far have they gone? And how are they looking at it along with Russia to be able to do this?
From its own perspective, they do not have an armed forces that's capable of projecting power. They don't have 800 bases around the world. The one base they have in Djibouti is right next to the British, French, and American, so that would not be a strategic place to be launching anything or supplying vessels that were, in effect, trying to prevent the piracy that the U.S. is doing. Once again, I'm a little bit dismayed by my colleagues' unwillingness to point out the reason Keir Starmer and everyone else is not willing to join Donald Trump in this folly is because it's illegal. It goes against the UN Convention. It's like asking somebody to participate in a robbery. None of them want to be criminals to that degree. So I think you have to call these things out. You can't just say, well, I think everyone's kind of not happy with this. This is a crime.
Isn't the United Nations where you have to call these things out? How effective has the United Nations been, and how effective has China been at the United Nations, Einar?
Yes, China has brought resolutions and things like that, but as we've seen with Gaza, it's the U.S. and sometimes a few other countries, but basically Israel, who stand in defiance of the rest of the globe. I mean, this is less than 4.5% of the world's population, which is basically giving the finger to the world and saying we will not we will not obey any kind of international standards, and we will use our veto power for our own, to maintain our own position and the position of Israel. So we have to, most of the commentators here tonight have called this out for what it is. Saying that somehow China is responsible or that it's supposed to clean up what the U.S. is doing, they're not in a position to do it. They do not want to supply arms to Iran. They do supply dual-use items, according to the government, but they do not want to get into direct confrontation. And, you had the former ambassador of the U.S. to China actually chiding China, saying, oh, China's useless. They're not coming to the defense of Iran. Well, think of the implications. Two nuclear powers facing off against each other.
Let me take that across to Sierra very quickly, even as we try to wrap this up, because this is a very important debate. We have minimal time, but Sierra, what do you say to that? about US's stance towards China and now this kind of economic strangulation through the blockade?
Well, first of all, I would say that it's not definitive that this is against international law. I won't go into the long explanation, but there are multiple views on that side. And in terms of the UN, as you pointed out, the UN has been completely ineffective in dealing with Iran in the nuclear threat that Iran poses to the world, including China. These are people who will use nuclear weapons if they get them. That has been over and over again proven and restated. And so that's what President Trump is facing and dealing with. He's also managing the relationship with China. He has a meeting coming up in May with President Xi. I haven't heard anything about that meeting, not going forward at this point. And the trade relationship with China, which is going to be the main talking points in that meeting, I believe, is also very important to the U.S. and the world. And so President Trump manages all of those things on different planes, security and trade. And I believe that the Chinese government is also able to do that and to see that security
Sierra, do you think we're looking at a temporary coercive tactic that the US has towards China? Or is this the early stage of a confrontation between the two powers playing out through the energy and sea lanes?
Well, there's always a confrontation between the U.S. and China, and a push and pull over world influence. But I don't think that President Trump is looking to fundamentally change the relationship that we have with China right now. I mean, he's looking to change the trade relationship, certainly. But, if the Chinese want to pursue aggression in the South China Sea or anywhere like that, America stands ready to respond. But President Trump isn't looking for that.
Makes it clear the US blockade is not simply about punishing Iran. It is about denying Tehran revenue for sure, reshaping the oil flows, signaling to China that energy dependence comes with strategic consequences. All of that is true, but this strategy carries enormous risks from energy price shocks, inflation, maritime escalation, pulling Asia deeper into a conflict that it did not choose. So whether this coercion leads Iran back to the negotiating table or not, it does definitely accelerate a wider possibility of a confrontation between the US and China. For one, it remains a central uncertainty. But what is clear that the cost of miscalculation in these narrow sea lanes, that would be global, and the implications would be too high to put in half an hour show. But my thanks tonight to Aina Tanjan, Veena Sikri, Janda